We're back with a bonus conversation you'll only see here on CBS News New York. So my question to you is this: if you had to do it all over again, would you do it?
I would, and maybe that makes me a sick human being, but I spent a lot of time thinking about that after we resigned. You know, if I could have gotten off the merry-go-round in 2013 or 2014 or 2015. But, you know, it mattered. What I did mattered. Leading the world through COVID mattered. $15 minimum wage, paid family leave, the Tappan Zee Bridge, these contributions mattered. And even with everything that I went through, even with its effect on my personal life, my mental health, being batted around like a piñata in the press, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.
So are you really a recovering public servant as you describe yourself?
You know, Marcia, look, I look around and I'm really disappointed in government right now at every level. And I think about it a lot. And, you know, I always thought at some point I may run for something. And the more and more I sort of separate myself from everything that happened, the more and more I think that that could be a reality. I have more left to give. And I think that we all have to contribute something in this world, and I think that public service is where I can do the most good.
You know, as I watched this whole thing unfold with the 11 women who came forward to accuse Andrew Cuomo, I sort of wondered, you know, whether you thought it was an organized cabal on the part of Lindsey Boylan. And as I was reading in your book, I sort of got the feeling that you thought that, but I really wonder how do you feel?
I think that Lindsey absolutely was the driver of this from the onset. And, you know, it's not something that's like women's intuition or in my gut. I've read the text messages, I've seen the discovery, I've sat in on the depositions. And she had a mission. And she wanted to take out the governor. She had threatened 2 members of our senior staff in the spring of 2020. She had this delusional idea that we were doing things like suspending petitioning for Congress to hurt her, which is so devoid of reality. And, you know, it was very telling that she didn't start accusing him of sexual harassment until after this woman, Charlotte Bennett, had reached out to her and said, oh, he once made a pass at me, and then she kind of changed her messaging. And, you know, she absolutely was organizing the New York Magazine Rebecca Traister story. She was behind that. She was out with Ronan Farrow early. And when you actually, you know, strip away some of these everyday interactions that were weaponized, but just given numbers, you were really left with 2 to 3 what could have been meaningful claims. And the brilliance of what the Attorney General did was she upped the number so much that no one would look at those individual claims because they couldn't stand on their own.
Are you afraid that having said these things in the book about Lindsey Boylan, that she'll come after you? I mean, you clearly seem to think that she's a vengeful person. I
mean, she's been coming after me for 2 years. The number of stories she planted about me in the press, you know, what she did to other members of my administration. She's out threatening people in text messages on Twitter, trying to get them fired. I mean, at this point, bring it on. Like, what else can she do to me?
Do you think that the governor's management style hurt him in terms of support from other members of the legislature who might have supported him? For example, you say in your book, and I quote, "To get anything done, you have to be a disruptor. You incur the wrath of people who would rather be left alone to do things their way." And Governor Cuomo was a disruptor.
Certainly. I mean, yes, and I think I sort of hint at that in the book. I think it was a combination of the MeToo movement and claims made by women are such a dangerous thing, particularly in the Democratic Party, that it creates a firestorm and people feel like they need to respond and call for resignation and do these things. But there was political opportunism here by a lot of people who felt like he had too much power for too long, and it was their shot, and they took it. And, you know, they executed it. So I think that he certainly had sharp elbows at points, you know, and I know it. You know, the Second Avenue subway, I was in the room when he threatened contractors with debarment if they tried to change the deadlines. You know, I saw him twist arms.
Why am I not surprised by that?
To get budgets done on time. You know, like his strength was also in a lot of ways an Achilles heel in the end, because it left us with little support in the legislature at a time when we needed it.
I was sort of surprised at how quickly Carl Hastie, who had gone on trips with him all over the world, was quick to accept the Assembly's version of their report.
You know, Carl, I think, was in a tough spot because, again, I think that when the President of the United States calls for resignation, even without reading the report, which I put in my book, and, you know, Biden, when he called for resignation, he said, I didn't read the report, but I saw the press conference. It puts so much pressure on everyone else to duck and cover. What I found incredible about the Assembly in general is that that's a body that really prides itself on due process. And the amount of criminal justice reform that we did and discovery reform, et cetera, except when it came to this one issue. And so it was very surprising to me at the time, but I think it was just an amount of pressure that Carl couldn't withstand.
But when Andrew Cuomo decided that he was going to resign, you asked him not to. You told him he should fight and that you would help him. Yeah. And this was at a time when you were ready to quit yourself.
I had already resigned.
So what's with that?
You know, and I talk about this in my book, it was such an emotional week and a half, that whole period. And he hadn't decided he was going to resign until the night before he resigned. And I got to the mansion that morning and he showed me his speech and I read it and burst into tears. And, you know, his instinct was to fight. That's who he is. He's a fighter. But at the end of the day, he could count the votes and he could see more than even the fact that, you know, the jig was up and the fix was in and there wasn't going to be a fair shake, that it was hurting the people around him. He saw what it was doing to me. I mean, I was falling apart in front of his eyes. He saw what the pain it was causing his children, what it was doing to his brother's career, what it was doing to our former top staff. And so, you know, he said, it's time. And in that moment, I said, don't do it, because I really didn't want him to do it for me. I didn't want to feel like he was giving up the governorship in part because I could no longer handle the pressure. And so I said to him, you know, I'll stay and fight, I'll help you. But, you know, Andrew Cuomo can count votes if nothing else, and he knew it was time.
Did you think he made the right decision?
I think he made the only decision. I think he had to stop the bleeding. I mean, we were in such crazy territory. There were rumors running around that the Albany sheriff was going to arrest him. You know, our former staff, who had been our close advisors, were all losing their jobs. People were being crucified in the press. I was being compared to Hitler's enabler in Maureen Dowd's column. I mean, we had reached such a level of sheer lunacy that I think he had to stop the bleeding.
So I wonder what it was like for you, because you, obviously a powerful woman, had endured misogyny, harassment, as many women, including myself, have had to deal with on the way up. So were you sort of conflicted, or did you have this belief that these were charges that had no merit?
You know, it's not that simple. I think that, you know, people say to me, are you saying that 11 women are lying? No, I'm saying 7 or 8 of them, I think it's absolutely true. I watched it. We all did. He kissed people on the cheek. He puts his hand on a waist. He calls you sweetheart. You know, he, you know, puts his hand on a face at a wedding. But is that a fireable offense? The 3 that I think were, you know, the 2 to 3 that I think could have been considered more serious, the groping allegation, I never believed for a second. Never for a second. And when it fell apart in Albany, I mean, when we came to learn the real facts there and Soares looked at it, and there was a tremendous amount of pressure on the Albany DA to bring that case. And he reviewed the evidence and essentially said there's no jury.
Well, he said, according to your book, that the Attorney General did not include exculpatory evidence.
Yes. Well, the craziest thing about it, Marcia, was that the Attorney General concluded that this happened on November 16th. And then a cursory review of November 16th demonstrated there was absolutely no way that it could have happened on that day, which meant that not only did she not corroborate this very serious claim that helped take out a governor, she didn't even properly investigate it. And then when the DA saw other things, you know, inconsistencies in the story, things she said in the press versus things she said to them, the dates didn't work, all these things, it just became clear that it would never, no jury in America would have found him guilty on it. So on that one, I never believed it for a second. But it's, you know, the brilliance of the 11 is you try to get a one-size-fits-all answer for what I believe is sort of a range of behavior. And there were a lot of complications, but nobody had time for nuance. Nobody had time for gray. Everything was black and white.
But see, here's the situation. You you as a woman had to make a decision. These women were right, and these women were wrong. But before that happened, there was a policy in your office where whenever the governor would be with a woman, there had to be an open door. Now, was that looking at the possibility that there's a MeToo movement going on and you want to protect him, or was there a concern about, you know, he's a touchy-feely kind of guy?
No, he had that policy in place since the Clinton days.
He did?
Yeah. No, that was his original rule, going back to the Clinton days. I mean, you know this. He was a product of the Monica Lewinsky era, and he was notoriously paranoid about someone, saying he said something or did something. And so this was something that went back to the 90s. So this wasn't a new thing, and it was something he, frankly, had in place for his own, his own protection. But this was the other piece of it that made me, it was really like it felt intellectually dishonest on the part of the media. It was like, this was a guy who grew up, spent his whole adult life in a fishbowl, who is...
I remember.
Yeah, I mean, you were there covering him in his 20s, and his father, and going back that far. And, hyper paranoid, doesn't trust anyone. How many articles have been written this over the years? It's like, but now you're saying in the middle of the afternoon, he's gropes a staffer in the mansion with a house full of people. But it didn't matter. And to question was to smear, and you were victim shaming, and you weren't allowed to ask any questions, or else you were an enabler and you were a victim shamer. But to me, the biggest fear I have coming out of this is the MeToo movement, necessary corrective. But some things require an apology, right? You kissed me on the cheek. I don't want to be kissed on the cheek. Apologize. Some things require training. Maybe you shouldn't say sweetheart. Maybe you shouldn't, these things. Some require firing and some require jail. But we've lost a step. And now it's like everyone is Harvey Weinstein or Bill Cosby. And again, I think that risks setting the whole movement back, because then it makes it too easy for people to dismiss serious allegations.
But so I'm just curious. So here you are, and you're having to defend your boss in the situation, but you're reading all these articles that everybody had to write because this was the Attorney General doing a report. Did you harbor anger about that towards the media who were, you were in the report a lot as well, but you must have had a resentment that it was unfair.
I still do. Even since the transcripts came out and other underlying evidence comes out, and the Trooper 1 lawsuit is going forward, and the things we're learning from that, nobody wants to litigate it. No one wants to talk about it. Everyone wants to move on. But my point is, and a large part why I write the book, and you've read it, Marcia, the whole epilogue, I lay it out very factually using transcripts and evidence. None of it's conjecture, none of it's my opinion. And we can't be in a situation where a duly elected attorney general is allowed to weaponize her office to try to take out a political opponent. And it's the job of the media to call balls and strikes, not to just be stenographers. And where I felt like the media really fell down was that nobody scrutinized. Everyone just acted like stenographers. And even to this day, anytime I see the number 11, I'm like, 3 of those women under oath said that they weren't sexually harassed. So, it's just, it was a crazy time, and it wasn't the media that I grew up with in that moment.
So I have one last question. Do you think that Andrew Cuomo has a future in politics?
Yes. I think that there is a real lack of leadership at every level right now. I think the more time goes by, the more people look back at what happened with more of a sober assessment, think that it was hysteria. We were all caught up in a moment. And I think that there is more and more an appreciation for somebody who's effective.
So what will it take for him to come back?
That's a question for him. And if he decides to run, I would support him any way I can, but not going to work for him again. It's time for me to chart my own course.
And on that note, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you at home for joining us as well.